Changing the world, entire economies, the means of production, consumption, entire supply chains, our individual operations, our people, infrastructure, not to mention the very ecosystems and all processes we depend upon, is extremely challenging. Given how much of our world depends on a status quo of operations, the global systems, people, and their behavior, and everything remaining as normal, and how most of our, over 90% of our trade, and many aspects of our lives depend so much on shipping, ports, and the interdependent supply chains, it is no wonder that perhaps we might take so much of this for granted, except when it so clearly goes wrong. The April 2021 example of the Ever Given, where shipping was frozen for 6 days in the Suez Canal, when the container ship caused congestion and blockage, caused significant billions of untold, unprecedented damage. However, while this dominated news headlines momentarily, global climate change at every moment is projecting unknown disruption risk costs. So, the actions that we take against climate change, mitigation and adaptation are just some of the many solutions in which we really need to do our best to expand and resolve our world in a climate-resilient blue economy and post-19 epoch recovery. Today, I, Dr. Jack Dyer, founder of Blue Economy Future, will be giving my third podcast on how we can save the planet. More specifically, this will include through implementing zero-carbon shipping, our strides, achievements in decarbonisation and maritime supply chains. And for more information, please feel to check things out. It has been frequently stated that we must act, yet how do we act and why do we act? And what are the best ways to do something about it? This podcast, as with the others, has realized that we need to consider the rapid decarbonisation of our maritime sector. But to do so, we need to understand what this process might be, why is it so important, and what does it mean for the blue economy. We have to understand, it's helpful to understand the core policies, the regulations, the stakeholders. We can learn from great examples of success and failure. We can work out that there is a market demand for it. We can also look at the environmental, economic, social, and other justifiable benefits of doing so. We can look at any particular risks involved, and we can really be inspired by some of the great entrepreneurial and other solutions out there, whether they exist in changing people's behavior, in financial incentives and disincentives, through education and training, information, technology, and so forth, and then work out what exactly we need to move forward. So, what is the global blue economy? Global blue economy has been in the previous initial podcast that I attended, refers to our sustainable lifetime long-term resilience of our oceans, our marine, our rivers, our ecosystems, and all dependent supply chains. It has been proven that if we that shipping and the maritime supply chain and ports are incredible components of how this blue economy contributes to changing so many people's lives. Previous research has investigated not only the enormous contributions that this can create in terms of employment, economic growth, development, and other opportunities, but in terms of avoiding pollution, environmental damage, and so forth. And every $1 invested in decarbonisation of shipping would get a minimum benefit of a 200 to 500% return. Global climate change is one of the greatest risks, with the risks of, as we have seen in the most recent number of extreme climate change events. That is why so many stakeholders are taking it so seriously to decarbonize and are looking for softer targets, such as the maritime sector, which is comparatively easier than the number of cars. We have to do our best to try and change a lot. It has been frequently stated that we must act, yet a more invisible movement out there in the world, beneath the surface of everybody else's attention, when we're focusing on the need for action and deliverance, is the fact that the private sector in particular are acting against this area. In the last few years, it has become incredibly certain that industries, private sector industries, and their organizations such as the International Maritime Organization, the International Association of Ports and Harbours, the private shipping sector through those such as the World Ocean Council and other forums, are taking their own initiative to reduce emissions. Despite pledges to, this is promptly inspired by an IMO sulfur fuel cap, which pledges to reduce the sulfur emissions of global climate change and other greenhouse gases to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, but achieve a net zero sulfur cap by 2030. However, as shipping demand grows, so does the risk of carbon emissions and global climate change risks. Shipping is becoming increasingly part of the problem and slightly increasing its solution. If we allow this problem to continue, we're going to face even more 50% emissions. And yet there are many great signs to be incredibly encouraging. For example, there's pioneering work being done in all sorts of alternative fuels, which indicates that we no longer need to support fossil fuels. More and more companies are diversifying from them, converting them into hydrogen, ammonia, LNG, or liquefied natural gas, wind propulsion, solar energy, biofuels, or just improving existing efficiency and measures. And there are different places such as Russia, Singapore, Japan, and so forth, which are proving that the concept itself does work. Therefore, in response, this latest project focuses on podcast, on how stakeholders can and need to accelerate meaningful change in this sector. It specifically concentrates on implementing zero-carbon, sustainable, future-proof shipping from a mitigation point of view, i.e. to reduce the emissions at source, to capture them and ensure that they no longer create a problem or that they can be converted into really useful products. Many of this work that I presented here has appeared in practical consulting experience, my involvement in forums such as the World Ocean Council, my direct links and networking with entrepreneurs, and many other solutions, as well as professional abilities and insights. This aims to help all stakeholders to provide an idea of what they can do about it, about what is being done in the area, what are the opportunity costs involved, and what is the best way that we can make a difference or prioritize investments and support, whilst being conscious of what's going on. Whether directly or indirectly, we're all, as producers, consumers, operators, governments, and supply chains and operators, entirely dependent upon these very sectors. A failure for us to act against the need for decarbonisation and to act against climate change will create even more and more disruptions. Although it is inspiring that people are acting to work hard in this area, we cannot also simply rely upon them. We need to inspire and motivate others to join. We need to support innovators and discourage those who act against these measures. So, what is shipping decarbonisation? There may be no formally internationally accepted legal definition of the term. However, it is based on reviewing over several hundred sources and one's own experience. I define it as linking the specific measures taken, including energy and fuel utilized, to support the vessel and its entire supply chains from renewable non-polluting sources. Now, there are many different types of fuel and sources which can contribute to shipping decarbonisation that will be explored in this text. These include, but not limited to, green, for example, for hydrogen, you could come up with green, pink, yellow, turquoise, green, and blue. However, if these sources come from polluting sources, they're known as grey. Then there's different forms such as hydrogen, decarbonisation, and so forth. hydrogen, trying to avoid emissions, and other sources. However, certain sources, unless they're particularly non-polluting, must be remembered that most of these sources come from existing polluted measures and of varying degrees of efficiency. They still have risks. As with many different types of technology, it must be noted that people remain incredibly uncertain as to these different types of fuels. Many of them exist in pilot projects and protocols, and then there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in developing the sector. However, these pilot projects exist, which is extremely encouraging and rewarding. So the best and cleanest form of hydrogen is that of green hydrogen, which can be produced from a number of different sources, whether it's through electrolysis, using gas, bioreactors, biofuels and technology, and so forth. Hydrogen has certain technical, safety and security measures that needs to be done in terms of processing and converting it, even though it does have a lot of benefits in terms of not producing carbon, nitrogen dioxide or sulfur dioxide. It may, however, lead to certain risks such as acid rain and so forth. Then there's the concept of methane, and then there's methane and methanol, which it reduces emissions by a significant degree. However, very few vessels have looked at least a quarter, but still leads to producing quite a bit of pollution and damage, including the risks of methane slip, which being higher than carbon, for example, could lead to even worse problems with climate change. Or there's the approach of using vegetation such as sugarcane and other processes to do so. There is still incredible work needed in order for lithium batteries, fuel cells and other measures to do so. Finally, apart from looking at gases such as LNG, which has its own peculiar storage capacity, it must be also noted with concern that and fascination that many stakeholders are in fact talking about going back to solar, wind and sail propulsion measures as a form of energy, having literally a blast from the past. So in order to create this blue economy and achieve a sustainable maritime decarbonisation age, it is incredibly important to consider many different factors, including the technical qualities of the gas, biofuel, other products involved, so it can be safely and securely handled. It can be important to understand what stakeholders want and required. There are different measures and approaches that need to be installed in harbours and supply chains, including deciding whether it's done by vessels and portable tanks or ships, pipelines, terminals, trucks or trains. And it must be remembered that it is insufficient to decarbonise just the fuel or the shipping side of it, but to ensure that there's sufficient storage for it, sufficient capacity and resources, fuel is imported, exported, the infrastructure is modified, products can be recycled, the financial and insurance sector contribute, and all measures so that an entire supply chain not only can provide these gases, biofuels or alternative sources of energy reliably, securely, cost effectively, technically capably and so on, but in themselves these solutions do not contribute further to incredible marine climate change and gas. So there are many different types of fuel. As we can see, these fuel alternatives range from ammonium and methane and methanol to hydrogen fuel tanks with liquefied natural gas and liquefied petroleum gas, or as I said, there's wind propulsion, solar energy cells and other technical measures. But for us, then there's the further increasing nature-based solutions, which are looking at offsetting kelp, seaweed, algae, blue carbon sources and other prospects which have alternative benefits such as rewilding and restoring ecosystems, helping blue carbon, offsetting sinks and adapting to climate change or mitigating against climate change, creating alternative sustainable income sources, tourism opportunities, and myriad other benefits. So, what we have to consider is that there are both strengths and weaknesses in this area. This area presents a lot of legal risks and uncertainty because comparatively few guidelines and measures have been specifically created to ensure maritime decarbonisation and these fuels, with the potential exception of ammonia and liquefied natural gas and hydrogen, which over the last couple of decades, 2-3 decades, has been primarily focused on ensuring the safety and responsibility of it, including the International Code for Safety on Ships using gas or low flash point fuels, the ISO standards, MARPO standards against pollution, ILO standards to ensure that people are safely and securely managed, and other measures taken against pollution or climate change, as well as ensuring a safe, trained crew are responsible. However, these measures have not extended into other experimental techniques such as ammonia, methane, methanol, biofuels, blue carbon, and other alternative solutions. It must also be noted with concern that this is a really underdeveloped area. This might encourage certain investors to enter soon to make the most of it, but at the same time it exposes them to potential liability and litigation until the policy uncertainty, any potential incentives for favouring the maritime decarbonisation or decarbonisation of entire supply chains, or any disincentives and penalties against fossil fuels, their investments, their support and utilisation should also be taken into consideration. Internationally, it is encouraging, however, that there becomes an increasingly more set market for the product. These markets might include the emission control areas being set up in Japan, China, Caribbean, North America, and the Mediterranean or Black Sea. To implement maritime decarbonisation to monitor and regulate it would be a comparatively simple thing, as these framework mechanisms already exist under MARPO or as a requirement to specifically highlight data and so forth. Additionally, there is a further market, particularly in Europe, as over 90% of emissions in Europe are supposed to be cut under the Green New Deal. Local emission examples are also particularly important and matter in order to develop these sectors. These emissions should include, but not limited to, particularly work has been done, especially in Norway and Australia and Japan and South Africa, to particularly take into account alternative fuel sources such as hydrogen in particular and LNG and develop them for export. In the case of hydrogen, this means converting coal and other fossil fuel based economies, which traditionally has been a reason for reticence and discouragement of the fossil fuel based sectors to actually commit to this sector, but in the fact that they can convert coal into cleaner hydrogen and have a steady ready market for it, cost effectively, cheaply, safely and securely. There's also been measures done, especially to develop hydrogen and LNG, because even more so than the other fuels, because of the particular role that they can play in generating additional tax revenue for the particular exporters of those countries, for cleaning environmental emissions and reduced ecological damage and climate change contributions, for the growth in exports, income generation, skills development, training, innovation, technology, training, employment creation, tax revenue, and other areas. Legally, it has also become incredibly important to consider that we need the ultimate framework for a maritime decarbonisation and zero-emission age. This in particular means that if we are to create this new sector and capitalise on the examples already provided from Norway and others, that we need to ensure that that countries have the right institutional capacity and framework to implement this decision with autonomy, sufficient funding in human resources, research, physical infrastructure and capacity, pipelines, developments and so forth needs to be undertaken. These stakeholders must have sufficient measures to adapt not only the legal policies but embrace technology, look at marine protected areas and other solutions. Additionally, they need to also consider what else needs to be done in terms of local and international law. There is also a need under creating a maritime decarbonisation framework to ensure that stakeholders are actively involved, that people know exactly what's going on, and that our human rights, our ecological access and other principles are particularly prioritised, particularly one of the polluter pays or precautionary principle that it is better to act now than to act later, provided that we do no extra harm or damage but actually do our best to contribute. We have to look at, if we are going to look at decarbonising our economy and converting to a zero carbon age, we can be encouraged by the examples of the South Pacific, who are doing a number of different projects, particularly in the scope to measure the fuel contributions, to develop prototype vessels, and to develop the infrastructure and the capacity to do so, along with establishing a cost-effective, ready market demand and supply for that measure. This particular work has been conducted in the Marshall Islands. The World Bank also, with its study on green ammonia, have also proven that there's a significant market demand available from green ammonia demand and supply, not just for shipping but from other industrial applications. As people feel, as investors, businesses and so forth feel incredible pressure to reduce emissions. Then there's the work being conducted in Europe, where Norway has over the last decade or two established a couple of professional networks in order to develop the sector and know exactly what's going on. It has created numerous examples of hybrid and completely all-running LNG-based fuels, along with research innovation cluster, access to funding and support, development and other policy framework and other initiatives. As a stakeholder, I've already mentioned my involvement in the World Ocean Council. In particular, apart from a network designed to attract the funders and investors into maritime decarbonisation, my work has also looked at the entrepreneurs coming up with really great inspiring solutions in this area, but also in the fact of how this can serve to protect through the working group on ports and coastal infrastructure, adaptation resilience, who through its monthly roundtables and other initiatives have committed to implementing best practices and other approaches towards decarbonisation of ports, shipping and supply chains, along with adapting climate change shipping to other risks. There are also similar initiatives being conducted by the World's Port Sustainability Programme, Sustainable Shipping Initiative, Decarbonisation Ports and Harbours Network, and you can see examples from shipping companies such as Maersk, Dubai Port World, APM Terminals, everywhere from the Solomon Islands to Helsinki, Auckland, Taiwan, Oslo, Mediterranean, Singapore and others, of efforts to ensure cleaner, greener, sustainable ports, which is now coming to realize as maritime which is now coming to realize as extremely critical. Of course, with maritime decarbonisation, the bracing of LNG fuels, methane, ammonia, and other hydrogen and other technologies, the examples such as in Pakistan, Namibia, Ghana, and elsewhere have proven that you do need to involve stakeholder consultation. You do need to do assessments to determine what the potential risks, ecologically, economically, socially, technologically, human capital, and other investment risks might be. However, one of the main problems and weaknesses in this area is that only hydrogen and liquefied natural gas have proven themselves to be potentially cost viable, technically feasible, effective, productive, and managed. This same measure has not worked, however, for ammonia, methanol, methane, biofuels, and other solutions. There is also, however, the fact that even despite all these great efforts, it is clear that LNG in particular and hydrogen also have their own fears and concerns. With hydrogen, people often think of the Hindenburg and how it exploded, notwithstanding the numerous measurements and safeguards that have been developed since that time. In South Africa, the example to create floating liquefied natural gas power stations created huge concern to the local communities because it was felt that these fuels did not create any additional benefit to the local economy, in contrast to the favouring of hydrogen, as this has potential to save a quite militant coal mining industry sector as an alternative. So there is also the problems that South Africa has had at introducing LNG and hydrogen in particular, based on significant opposition from local communities and NGO groups, many of whom don't understand the measures involved, but also from the perceived risks and uncertainty, despite it being considered extremely safe. Okay, current market developments in the areas of these alternative fuels have yet to be developed, and this, along with the research gaps, proves the problem. Many of these gases have yet, and biofuels, alternative energy efficient solutions and so forth, have yet to sufficiently prove themselves, existing only on a pilot prototype experimental basis. However, the experiences of hydrogen and LNG, their myriad applications, the growing demand and so forth, and the comparatively fact that there's only around 30 to 40 import terminals and others across Europe, shows that there's, from a demand and a supply point of view, there's incredible scope for investment and development of this infrastructure. The Global Hydrogen Council have estimated that up to 50% of the costs could become even more cost saving in the next 10 years if it achieves sufficient economies of scale and production as rapidly extends. It could become incredibly market competitive with fossil-based fuels at only $1 to $3 per kg for production costs. Yet more and more stakeholders themselves and others need to be committed. So in 2021, the top producers for imports were primarily dominated in the UK and Asia, most notably in South Korea, India, and Japan. Further market developments to state that the world is, as I've said, the world is facing continuous prodding in order to actually do something. In the next 3 years, by 2023, the International Energy Agency have already thought of a global market worth over $200 billion, which needs to be committed. These measures for reducing climate change emissions will be particularly even more crucial given the really even greater expense and disruption risk caused by adapting to a risk after it happens, as opposed to preempting action by doing one before so. It is also incredibly potent to extend the existing greenhouse gas emissions and mitigation through climate change and other extreme solutions, which will provide the basis for the next podcast. Korea has already decided to commit to similar infrastructure along with the European H2 Ports Initiative. However, it must be noted that many of these developments, many of these regions and policies and approaches is only based on one continent. It is only based in the Northern Hemisphere, with South America, Australia and South Africa offering Africa offering only one or two, or even just a handful, comparatively speaking, of ports able to undertake this. The problems with relying on global hydrogen production are reasons why it needs to be rapidly upscaled. These includes the fact that many of them have alternative uses such as ammonia, methanol, refineries and so forth. Global Wind Energy Council suggests that there's an over 93% in emissions and so forth. Inspiringly, over $300 billion of private sector capital is being committed by companies, finances and so forth. However, the problem with this sector Right. Then there's the fact that even floating LNG powered terminals are even more cost effective than $1.5 billion. There is work being done also in the Caribbean to do so. Maritime decarbonisation in a zero emission age has many obvious benefits. Not only does it work to help reduce the emissions that are being produced by climate change, but this obviously leads to improved quality of life, reduced pollution, improved health, research and innovation and technology, and other benefits, along with creating employment, tax revenue, and other activities. The process itself for LNG and hydrogen as alternative sustainable fuel sources that can be safely and responsibly managed and carried has proven itself for over 20 years. It has been estimated that it could be extremely profitable and reduce costs enormously. It would help to resolve the pressure to reduce emissions under the IMO sulfur fuel cap and other requirements of the EU Green Deal to reduce 90% of emissions, and of course deal with emission control areas. Inspiringly, one company did indicate that more than 80 vessels are being created in this area as well. Although maritime decarbonisation presents a number of disadvantages, including specific technical standards and safety, security and other factors when it comes to the safe handling of risks, the opportunity costs of lost employment and other capacity for all those people who lose their opportunities in the fossil fuel-based sector, is the fact that there's also a need for professional training and human capacity building, and the fact that the disadvantages of these routes is that many of them need to work out in the developing world. There's also a need to improve access to traditional forms of maritime finance and insurance, marketing, publicity, and so forth, and also knowing which fuel, which efficiency measure, which technological innovation or solution, or old-fashioned wind propulsion measure, is the best solution, whether from price, efficiency, safety, security, and so forth. The example of the Hindenburg shows that many of the public still have their minds this growing perception of global climate change and other risks. People are incredibly nervous about what might happen. However, it must be noted that since 1959, only 8 incidents have been recorded from liquefied natural gas. And hydrogen, helium themselves have had, and hydrogen itself has also had relatively few incidents. You compare this to the most recent examples of the Exxon Valdez and Deepwater Horizon incidents of the Gulf of Mexico and in America, to Mauritius's oil spill tanker of the MV ratio, as in the front page. But the challenge remains about how to get the public over the fact that these are actually quite safe, secure, and non-polluting clean resources that are fundamentally critical if we are to adapt on a massive scale and really rapidly. We need to ensure that financiers are aware of the risks, the benefits, and rates of returns that they can enjoy on these measures. And we also need to get to a scale where there are not only more pilot projects, but actual more commercial examples. Once these concepts have a chance to prove themselves, then they can work really well. Previously stated, certain risks may exist, whether it includes pressure or decarbonisation, leakage, flammability, physical damage to the tanks or infrastructure themselves, things of crime, terrorism, counter threats, disturbances, and others. However, due to people's less familiarity with the concept, fossil fuels are more likely to become the scenes of dissent, protest, hostility, or problems. There is also the other risk to consider, that if you or I don't act to favour maritime decarbonisation, if a business doesn't act in the best interest to embrace this decision, another one will. Sustainable shipping is becoming a great marketing ploy, as well as making sound business sense. But it must also be known to take measures to ensuring that fossil fuels are simultaneously penalised and that there are other incentives to do so. So, there is inspiring hope to be said, and there are many, and these include many different solutions that are being developed by entrepreneurs in the world beyond. Aside from nature-based solutions, this not only includes cold ironing or using the fuel based on shore, as seen in the picture, or slow steaming and cutting down your emissions by vessels going particularly slow, although this does lead to longer voyage times, delays, possible additional crew costs, and other measures. Then there's the alternatives of improving the energy consumptions, looking at other technology-based solutions, changing the fuel, as we've stated, or looking at offshore wind, solar, and other energy forms. Many of these, however, remain in a pilot project. As stated, it's noted that general solutions will involve the changing of different supply chains, the development of biomass and other fuels in this sector, the establishment of initiatives such as Singapore's Maritime Research Centre and other professional partnerships, forums, and methods such as the International Advisory Panel on Maritime Decarbonisation, and NextGen, which aims to establish a professional network. So, as part of my research in identifying over 500 top innovative entrepreneurs, accelerators, entrepreneurs, and other radical solutions to maritime decarbonisation, creating a zero-emissions age, this includes fuel sources from measures such as algae and seaweed and kelp, or other forms of biomass from aquatic sources, to offshore wind energy propulsion, including fair wind, or you've got hydrogen such as CWP renewables and LNG. Additionally, there are other vessel technologies that have been utilized to develop Z-Buzz and Z-ships, looking at converting plastic waste and other pollution sources such as trace oil, biofuels. Already spoken about the work being done to develop offshore renewable clean shipping using traditional mechanisms through swire shipping. And then the Peace Boat Eco Ship might be among the first, aims to be the first eco-friendly, completely zero-emission, self-sustaining cruise ship. In conclusions, there is hope. It has to be noted that a temporary solution that many stakeholders are undertaking at the moment includes the usage of scrubbers, which particularly to reduce the emissions of sulfur. However, this use of scrubbers, along with energy efficiency and other measures, is only a short-term, temporary and limited solution, in the sense of, in the case of scrubbers, it might lead to greater emissions than other solutions. However, the more we rely on technology and innovation, the more we might be able to reduce the contributions that we are making to climate change, provided that we can help to communicate more effectively with different stakeholders and try and work out what's needed. Globally, supply chains over 5 million trucks and supply chains each year could be converted into hydrogen LNG. The sector could, for hydrogen just alone, could add a further $2 trillion each year to the global economy and support over 13 million jobs. Yet, any of this progress will be conditional upon making impact with the developed world. However, it all remains up to us to decide whether we want to act or not. Global climate change has severely disrupted maritime supply chains and lives. The surging wildfires in California, heat waves across Canada and Turkey, Greece, Spain, flash flooding in Germany, China and others, and the breaking of 17 out of 31 core indicators of collapsing planetary health are stark reminders. Yet as humans, we are still continuously actively contributing to global climate change and emissions-intensive processes when so many solutions exist. Too often, we fail to act as needed, and the move towards the global pandemic, COVID, and the need for recovery, such as online deliveries, as many are compelled to stay at home by governments or physically abandon exercise and obtaining global emissions, also presents its new challenges at curbing emissions. Our consumption habits and just-in-time production processes have intensified these emissions and great damage to global climate change. However, maritime transport contributes up to 3.5% of overall emissions to our planet's climate change. The top 15 ports and shipping represents a phenomenal percentage of that measure. That's why this podcast wants to aim to realize, okay, what is it, how important it is to act and what we really need to do about it. Therefore, moving forward, we can see that there are many different solutions that we can undertake. What we can do, each and every one of us, is work to support and encourage others to support whatever measure it takes. That means ensuring that we carbon offset or take alternative cleaner fuels when these become available, if possible. We report those who continue to support fossil fuels or act against them and act for change. Can do more direct actions such as taking part in protest marchings and doing whatever. Please feel free to reach out to me or anybody else if you really want to know what to do about it. But do whatever it takes, because over 5 billion consumers depend on fossil fuel-based energy. So whether it's changing our pension funds and our banking sector investments, choosing to walk or use public transport, carpool or other measures, or else just look at embracing cleaner fuels, you should do whatever it takes. So this podcast has identified a number of core short-term solutions and priorities that can be undertaken. These include improving the tax, legal, and other incentives and cutting down on fossil fuel disincentives in order to do so, helping to establish a market for businesses and people to do so, help to convert away from coal, natural gas and polluting sources of energy, ensure that we support greater research, innovation, trade, employment and other opportunities. Moving on in the next several years, given how urgent it is, we need to extend this awareness and priority into developing our infrastructure, establishing greater awareness, improving the policies and enforcement, ensuring that there's enough resources and institutional capacity committed to this, realizing that anybody who does pollute or causes crimes or deals with fossil fuels that can be avoided is sufficiently dealt with in monitoring mechanisms, so forth. In the long run, we need to keep making sure that our stakeholders and our politicians and ourselves continue to aspire to a completely zero emission era in all parts of the world. And anybody who cannot establish this in the developed world, in the developing world, makes sense to do so in the developed world. Because if there's one thing that we need to remember, is that it's not enough for us individually to act, but we need to act and embrace and consider all others. We need to support the technological, human and training capacity in order to do so, and improve coordination and other measures to actually get involved and really make a difference in this world. Therefore, moving forward, there remains chronic hope. In July 2012, the in July 2021, BP Lloyd's registers Decarbonisation Hub, the shipping company AP Miller Maersk, Man Energy Solutions, NY Line, Total Energies, and others committed to specific maritime decarbonisation. The EU and Commission and Parliament are debating as to whether to tax up to 70% of vessel emissions unless they become cleaner. COP26 in Glasgow is particularly focusing on a maritime decarbonisation event for the first time. And the Mediterranean shipping company MSC, Fincantieri and SNAM are even looking at hydrogen-powered cruise ships following the post-COVID-19 recovery. To conclude, the voyage towards implanting zero-emission shipping and maritime decarbonisation has already embarked. Growing technological trends and a market virtually guaranteed by legislation should mean it's already happening. Yet, the progress remains glacial, and humans need to do more than just encouraging a few entrepreneurs from the sidelines. We, as fossil fuel consumers, for the most part, need to extend our voices to prompt supply chains, the financial sector and others to completely reform their business models, and policymakers to completely redirect themselves. As we face a global climate emergency, we should be actively embracing and supporting any reasonable measure that can make such a pivotal influence at curbing our emissions and our resource footprints on this planet, our home world with its collapsing ecosystem and oceans. We need to be inspired by the visionary ideals of our stakeholders, many of whom could come. There can be no denying that these are unprecedented times in our planet's history. And if there's one thing we have learned, it's not to take the world for granted any longer. We are this close to losing everything that we hold most dear. And the planet has given us a reality check. Whether it's increasing climate change related disruption risks from the wildfires sweeping across Turkey, Canada, America and the Mediterranean, whether it's extreme climate change storms in the Pacific, flooding in the UK and Germany, and waves of unprecedented challenges, such as the collapsing of many ecosystems and the threatened collapse of the Gulf Stream current. Whether it's surging continent-sized islands of giant plastic floating waste and pollution, oil spills or former tropical paradises such as Mauritius, whether it's food instability, civil unrest, wars, anarchy, strife, disruption, huge swathes of migrants deciding to flee what they seek for sanctuary, whether it's the disruption caused by these and many other events that is causing us to face challenges and many of us to despair, whether it's the uncertainty from the lingering COVID pandemic, technological uncertainty, economic recessions, social instability, religious fundamentalism, and other problems that the world might face. It can be no denying that these may seem like really dark times. But there is a way out. There is a solution. Time does not have to run out if we ourselves are prepared to do whatever it takes to find our way out about it. And more, there are a number of those of us who have found ways out, who are believing in it, and are looking to spread the message and trying to encourage and inspire more people and to get as much into it as possible. Therefore, in these subsequent webinars, will be looking to showcase some of the solutions and hopes and opportunities that are out there in the world today. For there is a new path and new way out of this future if we ourselves can seek to do something about it. And I challenge us all to look deep into what matters. More and more, the world is turning towards the oceans as our potential saviors, to the marine or blue economy sector as a potential to solve us. More and more, there are others looking at rewilding the oceans and ecosystems, restoring our planet, and doing unprecedented moves in climate change, adaptation, resilience, migration, and other solutions, or the waste circular economy, or space, or other innovations and technologies. And it is my honour and my privilege to try and show you some of these movements in the upcoming series of webinars if you seek to be of interest. For those of you who may be wondering who I am, my name is Dr. Jack Dyer, founder of Blue Economy Future, which is a movement and awareness, as well as a consulting firm devoted to not just taking talk, but for talk is cheap, but doing whatever it can to strive into making implementation. And as part of this, I have been privileged to encounter many different strategies and approaches. I have honours in economics, a master's in the maritime economics from Africa, and a PhD in the South Pacific from Blue Economies and Climate Change. I have created a LinkedIn profile, Dr. Jack Dyer, Blue Economy Future SA, and a website, http://www.blueeconomyfuture.org.za. But I'm also looking to expand to YouTube and other interesting channels to show what the opportunities are for so forth. And so I will move on to my first webinar presentation to shout out to the world to show you what's going on. But I'm here to say that there will be more, and please feel free to get in touch, to keep on dreaming, to hope, and to realize that even though it may just seem that the politicians are talking and that there may seem little hope out there, but to remember never to give up, because there are solutions out there. We just not only need to be aware of them and to find them, but also to help support and believe and dream in whatever way we can. Thank you.